Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're back for part two of the discussion of the defense against the Seahawks after this wonderful 37-3 win. We had a lot of fun in the first episode talking with our friend Gabe Ferguson. Gabe, how you doing?
Ken, doing great. Love to talk about the Ravens football after a big win. So looking forward to another hour or so of discussion about the defense.
Take a listen. If you haven't downloaded it, please go do that now. We talked about the most dominant wins in Ravens history. I think this is in contention for that, and certainly was a great one. If you are interested in that, if you want to hear about the pass rush, if you want to hear about packages and the difference between big nickel and standard nickel, we talked a lot about the Ravens pressure schemes and how they were getting home, and what were the big things that the Ravens can take away from a big win like this, and hopefully take forward for the remainder of the season and into a deep playoff run. So lots of good stuff. I highly recommend you go give that a listen. But right now, we're going to talk about the individual player performances from this win. Gabe, who do you want to talk about first?
So I'm going to start with Geno Stone. He's been one of my favorite Ravens since he's been on the team. He came in, I think, 6th round draft pick. Was on the team for a while, got released, signed back, signed to a 1-year deal for this season. Always been a reserve player for the Ravens defense, been a core special teamer. And interestingly, we talked about him, I think, in the preseason. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we talk about in the preseason is expectations and, what makes a good season, what makes a great season. And one of the things that we talked about was, him basically coming in and playing a full-time position, being a great season for him. And one of the unfortunate caveats with that is that probably means somebody got hurt. Well, it did happen, unfortunately. Marcus Williams missed some time. And Geno Stone has come in, and not only has he filled in pretty big shoes, but he's played some of the best football we've seen from the safety position in quite some time for the Ravens. He's having an exceptional year. It's a little sad because you think there's probably zero chance that he's going to be able to come back to the team after this. But this is a year to remember for him. He had another great game. I think it was 4 weeks now in a row that he's had an interception. He has a knack for being in the right place at the right time, whether that's film study. I think that's a large part of it. Just kind of maybe a little bit of luck, but he also has good hands. He's coming down with the football a lot of times. In years past, the Ravens have dropped those balls. So I'm excited for him as a player. I think it's well-deserved. He's put in a lot of hard work. He's a very good player, and the Ravens are reaping the benefits now of having him on the roster at this point in his career.
So loving the game, the way the announcers were calling the game, and Romo basically, no, that can't be Geno Stone again. It's the weirdest thing to them. A point was made, and Humphrey made a post that he deleted about Stone not winning Defensive Player of the Month for October when he had 4 interceptions, and the leader had fairly pedestrian stats, a couple sacks and a bunch of tackles, and it wasn't a bad month for whoever did it, but Stone had obviously a lot of highlight plays that helped the Ravens to a pretty fantastic October. Do you think he got I'll tell you one thing. He didn't do himself any favors by missing a bunch of tackles during the month. So he made 15 tackles, but he missed 7. That's a 32% missed tackle rate. When your set of contributions is fairly thin in terms of the total number of plays, you have a chance to lose out despite a 4 interception month. And to me, really unfortunate. He probably should have won it, but in terms of the value of the individual plays, I think you can make a good case for it. But anyway, how did you feel about that?
I felt like he did deserve it. I mean, anytime a player has 4 interceptions in a month, that's pretty unique. It doesn't happen that often. I think it's probably, frankly, a name recognition type thing. He's not someone who's been around. He's not someone who's ever been to a Pro Bowl or, been wasn't highly drafted. He doesn't have any pedigree really, and it's not necessarily a flashy thing. So it's probably harder for a player like him to kind of make that mark. If he does it again for another month and has 4 more interceptions in the month of November, then I think it would be hard for him not to win it. I would hope for the second straight month of that kind of production. And well, he's on pace for it. So we'll see if he can keep it up.
I say Quincy Williams, 45 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble that was returned for a touchdown. Big month, obviously, for Quincy Williams. I don't want to put this down, but I will say Bart Scott in 2006, who was not a well-known name at the time, he'd played sparingly for 4 years with the Ravens, jumped in and won the September Defensive Player of the Month. And I think the defining characteristic is how great your defense is overall, which garners you the attention. And then they try and figure out who on that defense should get it. And I don't know exactly how the voting works, or if there's a panel and they're talking to each other. It's like you and me making a decision. Okay, then we can narrow it down to Quincy Williams and Geno Stone. Which one of these should it be? Or if it's like some voting is going on by various, media people, and they're each contributing votes, and Ravens players are maybe splitting votes because somebody's voting for Roquan, somebody's voting for Stone and whatnot. But anyway, or Matabike for that matter, another player who might have deserved it. But anyway, I don't know exactly how the voting works for it, but it seemed a little funny to me. Here's the other question that I have seen chatter about online: is Geno Stone a potential Defensive Player of the Year candidate? Or maybe we all know it's kind of unlikely. What would he have to do to get there?
I think at a minimum, for a defensive back, you need to double-digit interceptions. I think that's probably the mark that has to be met, which is doable. He's in the second half of the season for him, I think. But it's hard to win for a defensive back. And I think the last time a safety won it, I want to say, is maybe Troy Polamalu. I'm not sure.
Is that 2008 then?
It might have been.
Yeah.
I think we've had a couple cornerbacks since then, but I think a lot of NFL people would say a cornerback is a more impactful position than safety, just because of you're shutting down. Especially, it's going to shut down corner almost always. Who's also going to get a high number of interceptions. That's kind of the recipe. I think the last cornerback to get it was blanking on his name, the one out of New England. I think it was 3 or 4 years back. He plays for Dallas now.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, but It's been a few years for a cornerback as well. I think it's generally an edge player or defensive tackle. I think it's been mostly been a sack artist in the past several years. That's who it's gone to.
Yeah. I agree, and I think his chance to win it it's Stephon Gilmore is who you're talking about. Yeah,
exactly.
And so Aaron Donald's won it 3 times, 17, 18, and 20. TJ Watt won it once. JJ Watt won it once. Khalil Mack, Nick Bosa, JJ Watt a second time the year before. You have to go back to 2013 to find somebody who really breaks the corner / well, Aaron Donald is not an edge rusher, but he's in a special class of his own as an interior guy. Luke Kuechly, the last inside linebacker to win it in 2013. So, I mean, it's true. It hasn't really gone to a safety. And, I think his chances are low, but I think if I were to map out several paths, I think they're all low percentage chances, but I think he could put up an extraordinary interception total. And you say double digits. I'm going to say maybe he almost needs to get 11 or 12. Like 12, I believe, would tie the NFL record for a season. I know Paul Krause had 12, I think in 1964, but somebody else may have had 13 since, Lester Hayes or somebody like that. I could be wrong. But anyway, I think he needs a number like that with some other big plays on the returns, which so far he hasn't really had. He's had some step out of bounds issues with returning the football, but he hasn't really capitalized on his returns as yet. Having trouble with my sound? Let's hear you. Are you doing okay, Gabe? You're on mute right now.
Sorry about that. I lost my sound connection there for a second.
Okay. You can hear me now though, just fine, right?
Yep.
Okay, we should be okay because yours is recorded separately, just in case you folks out there needed some technical detail on how our sound works. But anyway, talking about multiple paths that Geno Stone has to make the to be a defensive player of the year. So extraordinary interception total, something on the returns, is number one. Coming number two is a combination of a league leading total, which might be 8 to 10 interceptions. That's not too much of a stretch right now for him to get that, but with a broader set of defensive contributions. So he needs to do something in the pass rush. He needs to maybe play at strong safety once Williams returns. And this is an interesting point because Geno Stone is not going to be a pure free safety anymore once Williams returns. I think a large portion of that is that Williams' injury would seem to preclude that. You know, if Williams is really playing with one arm for most of the year, he's going to be playing free safety. He's not going to be playing strong safety.
Yeah, that's a good point. It might allow Stone to play more in the box a little bit. So he could potentially rack up some of the tackle numbers. I know they're just counting stats. It's not the most flashy thing, but it goes. I think it does definitely is considered in the equation. So if he could be up, 80, 90 tackles, plus 8 to 10 interceptions, if he can have a couple of sacks, maybe force fumble or fumble recovery, score, that would definitely give him. I think that would put him in like the conversation at least. So and that would be a really exciting thing. It would be a great story as well. I think
it would be an incredible story for the NFL if a player like Geno Stone wins a Defensive Player of the Year, which is one of the reasons why they might want it to happen, which is kind of cool. The other thing that Stone could do, and we don't want to even think about the prospects of why this might occur, but if Stone suddenly becomes the putty that holds the defense together because of a major injury. And look, I don't want to jinx this by saying who, but you can probably figure out it's either inside linebacker spot would be a huge place where Stone would be an enormous part of fixing that hole if it were there. It's happening right now in terms of his play at free safety, but it's his standard position. So it's almost like he has to do something else different. Stone's never going to go to outside corner, but he definitely could move up into the box and play some dime. If the Ravens had an injury at inside linebacker. So we certainly hope that doesn't happen. But, if he suddenly is holding the defense together and is the guy like Tyrann Mathieu that people moved around to fill whatever hole you needed, then that is a path to it that I'm included in this broader set of contributions path.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's going in his favor is how well the Ravens defense as a whole is playing.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think generally, that player of the year is going to, if not the best defense, one of the best 2 or 3 units. And I think the Ravens are on track to be in that conversation.
I completely agree, and that was my fourth reason why I think you could admit it. If the Ravens defense reaches a historic status, or even is so clearly head and shoulders above the rest of the league, which they might be, although the Browns are right there in contention with them right now. If they're head and shoulders above the rest of the league, the problem for Geno becomes that there's a whole bunch of teammates who become competitors, and so Roquan Smith and maybe even players like Jadeveon Clowney or Owe or certainly Matabike or Patrick Queen or I don't know if Marlon Humphrey it's too late for him, but Kyle Hamilton could be a possibility. All those guys become competitors who can take away votes from you.
Yeah, that's one of the difficult parts, because especially as I think his position, he's not the player who's going to get 20 sacks, like an edge rusher who's clearly that's the guy who's making the biggest difference on the team. That's why that award, I think 80% of the time goes to, the sack artist, whether it's, the rare defensive tackle like Aaron Donald. More often it's the edge guy who's putting up 20 plus sacks in a season. It's hard to compete with that for sure if you're just playing on the back end and not getting some of the other stats.
Yeah, it's what's true about that is very summarizable. So you I'm sure in your work you put together a lot of slide decks for projects and to explain things and whatnot. And the more your information could be packaged with quick hitting comments or statistics that big people go, oh my God. And the best statistics are the ones you don't even have to beat the other person over the head with them to make them explain how important the statistic it is. You just kind of leave it there in your presentation. They go, wait a minute, you're telling me that's true? And they come to the conclusion that you wanted to by themselves. And sack totals will do that. Other things won't. But one thing that I think could help him is if one of these research avenues, maybe it's through the Big Data Bowl, maybe it's through something else that Sumer Sports doing with Eric Eager over there now, or the PFF guys do, come up with some great heat map of why opposing defensive coordinators, quarterbacks are avoiding Geno Stone. And wait a minute, are they putting the Tom Brady armband treatment? Is he getting that across the league right now? Well, then he's got a low, his interception rate is depressed artificially. You know, how can that be? It would be something like that puts him on the map, the heat map and the map of voters, that I think could be another route to it. All put together, by the way, I think there's about a 2% chance he wins Defensive Player of the Year. Where are you on that?
I would say it's less than 10%. Maybe right now, you know, I would say probably 5%. I think the interceptions is a flashy number. And I think there's a story there. I think that helps. And I think the Ravens defense as a whole helps him out. So if he can have double-digit sacks, or sorry, not sacks. If he can have double-digit interceptions, which is reasonable, I think, at this point. I think there's a not completely outside the box chance. So I don't know if there's some odds out there on it. I'd be curious to see if he's even on the list. Look for that. If it exists.
We should definitely look for that, because there might be a field bet too you can make, and then you get Geno Stone basically. Here's the next question that follows on that. Geno Stone being all pro, handicap that for me right now.
That I think he has a much better chance at. I would say probably I'll give him, you know, I'll give him like a plus 500 to be all pro.
So just to be clear, that's one chance in 6 that it occurs. So you're saying about 17%. I put 20 on that. So we're close on that one. How about making the Pro Bowl?
I think he's a lock.
A lock. I said 70%.
I would say 90% chance of making the Pro Bowl. Yeah.
Okay. But you are even more optimistic on Geno Stone than me.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's my Geno Stone bias. Because I really like him as a player, but it's hard not to, you know, be impressed by the Ravens do a good job of voting in their players for Pro Bowl historically. And I think, you know, the interception numbers speak for themselves, and kind of there has been a little bit of a story, especially, you know, every week even coming down with an interception. And if it continues even more, I think, you know, that becomes even closer to that. But yeah, I think Pro Bowl for sure. Okay.
All right. Well, I mean, if he makes the Pro Bowl, I think he probably already has priced himself out of Baltimore, a team that's already paying for 2 safeties. I know there's people thinking, if they could just trade Marcus Williams. No, they can't. They have to take about a $9 million hit next year. And I don't probably need to remind folks this, but my stern voice is coming on that they already spent $18 million of next year's money, or actually about $14 million of next year's money potentially, on Odell Beckham. That's the reason we can't have Stone next year, or Madubuike, or Zeitler, or probably a number of other players, Dobbins, you know, Clowney, you know, there's just a whole bunch of players that we can't have because so much was spent already out of next year's cap in void years this year trying to get it won. So there'll be a huge raft of free agents leaving town. We just got to wish them the best. Hope they have huge seasons this year, go to an NFC team, have big seasons again next year, and maximize the draft compensation the Ravens will get.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of players who were available for cheap. Ravens took advantage of that, and they definitely increased their price for the coming season. So I wouldn't rule out, you know, a couple of players coming back to play for the Ravens. You know, they can make some things happen with the cap. There's a lot of contracts that can be adjusted here and there, but it's going to be tough to bring back more than, you know, probably 2 or 3 at most.
Okay. All right. I'll take another player. We'll talk about, the guy who's had a good game this game and has been going well now for several weeks is Travis Jones. I've really been impressed with the amount of pressure he's getting. He had an amazing statistic from this last game that I gotta bring out though. When Travis Jones is on the field, so he played 37. I'm sorry, that's not the right game. That's for the whole season. He's played about 37% of the snaps. In this last game against Seattle, he played 19 snaps of 47. Not too much off his pace for the year. The Seattle Seahawks gained 5 yards on those plays. 5 yards on 19 plays, 0.3 yards per play when he was in. Jones had been having a lower percentage of sacks than most of the other linemen, but there were 3 sacks while he was in among 15 pass attempts in this game and a turnover as well. So outstanding Outstanding game from Travis Jones. He got pressures himself. Actually, I just have him for one pass defense in this game in terms of a pressure event. But he also was in there making good plays against the run, and the team is very effective with him in there, generally absorbing blocks and doing the things he does well.
Yeah, I think he has played well for the Ravens, and he's definitely been someone who's under the radar a little bit. He had a very impressive preseason for the team, but he's kind of taken a second seat to the defensive tackles that we talked about earlier. The ones Pierce, Matabike, they've been on the field more often in the kind of high leverage passing down situations, and deservedly so. They've played very well, but I think Travis Jones is someone who has that skill set to step up and have more of an impact if they want to kind of have more of a rotation there. I think Travis Jones can probably benefit by playing with Michael Pierce a lot and learning from him. They're different body types, but I think in terms of what they can do physically, I think there's some similarities there in terms of the ability to kind of use leverage, manipulate, press the pocket, kind of bully offensive linemen around. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do the rest of this year and the next couple of years to come, because he is one of the few young core defensive tackle players that the Ravens have in the upcoming season, and they're going to be needing a lot out of him over the next 2 seasons.
Yep, very exciting player. Who do you got next?
I'll talk about we already spent some time on Kyle Van Noy, so I don't want to spend too much time on him. In the previous episode, we spent a bit of time on him, but one of his compatriots at the position, Adafe Owe, we didn't talk as much about. He had a sack in this game, I think almost another near sack. That has been kind of one of the hallmarks of his young career, has been almost sacks, but I think he's starting to put together a little bit more. His athleticism is definitely on display still, especially on those kind of stunts that he's been used a lot on. There's one play where he kind of looped around the entire offensive line in this game. Was interesting to see. He started, I think, on like the right end and looped all the way around to the left end to kind of generate a pressure, force a throwaway. Just a really impressive player coming back from injury and, not missing a beat. He had a great first week, missed some time, and now he's still being a very impactful player down to down. He's generating pressure. He's a very underrated edge defender, I think, at this point. He's very good at setting the edge. I think the Ravens missed him in the stretch where he was out in terms of their run defense. And teams haven't been able to kind of run off tackle at that outside linebacker position the same way now that Owe is back, between him and Clowney and Tavius Robinson. I'll give him a little shout out. He's been pretty well on the edge as well. They have some stout edge guys now. And it's good to have, that full, well-rounded young outside linebacker that I think can be a cornerstone for the Ravens, moving forward.
Malik Harrison also, I think, has played pretty well this year.
Yes.
He really had been stringing together some great games, had a couple of missed tackles recently, but he's been a guy who has set the edge very well. And the Ravens are not afraid. I mean, in the base package, the thing they're basically going to on early downs is him and Tavius Robinson on opposite ends of the line. That's really trying to conserve those snaps for the big three to get in at the most impactful time when it's 2nd and 10 or when it's other times. And about the only time they get away from that is on the very first snap of the game. They use Harrison and Clowney to try and give them both the start. But other than that, they've been going with Robinson and Harrison in the base package. It was a good game for both of them. I think they have been setting the edge effectively. It's nice to see that from Tavius because he needs to find a way to contribute. He's in danger of being on the inactive list as the season rolls on here, and in particular if Tyus Bowser comes back.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that's going to shake out, because then in theory, you'll be carrying 6 outside linebackers. If you consider Malik Harrison an outside linebacker, maybe he's been playing there this year. Maybe you shift him kind of over to the inside linebacker and deactivate somebody at that position. I'm not entirely sure how that would work. If you want to have him, I think he he has been pretty strictly outside linebacker this year.
Yeah, strictly. He hasn't played any outside linebacker.
So I'm curious to see how that would shake out, because I don't know the player who would be taken off the active roster at this point. Maybe he's a defensive back.
Well, it's no doubt to me it's Tavius Robinson at this point. Mm-hmm. You'd sit him, and that's really the danger here. But Malik Harrison is way too valuable on special teams to be deactivated. Yeah. He's not quite the team captain, although I've been trying to see how they're using Stone now that they have the paucity of safeties. If you got a shortage there, can you really afford to have Stone be playing every snap on special teams the way he used to, or do you need to move Malik Harrison into that personal protector role, or just have him, call the signals? Otherwise, they have other guys. They have other guys on the team like Daryl Worley and others who are good choices. It's just that the problem is it's often a safety, and the Ravens need to keep their safeties healthy right now. So, anyway, it'll be, honestly, it's a good problem to have. If they have to deactivate a healthy scratch, we look at that, and we, sometimes we kind of scratch our heads and ask questions about why is that guy a healthy scratch? But honestly, if you've got healthy scratches at this point of the year at any position, you're a pretty healthy football team. There's a lot of walking wounded around the NFL who are activated without that being the smart decision.
I mean, at the beginning of the season, the Ravens had an active list that was completely full of players who couldn't suit up. So we felt that, is just a few weeks ago. So let me rephrase that question then in terms of who is removed from the 53-man roster if someone like Bowser is ready to come back. Maybe there's an injury, and it makes it an easy kind of decision. But right now, like you said, the Ravens are fairly healthy. Where do you think? And we had talked about Ndamukong Suh as well as a player who could potentially be added. Who do you think is the odd man out who might be lost in that situation?
So they already gotten a serious nut cutting time in terms of cuts by cutting Kayvon Seymour, which that's a player who the team he's a valuable backup cornerback. He's very valuable on special teams. He's probably the guy after Stone who's going to run special teams. If Stone wasn't available for some reason. So, you definitely want to have that guy around, and yet he's, he got hurt himself actually. I think in this last week, so maybe a question about his availability, but he's now in the practice squad. They've used one of his 3 elevations, and in terms of who they would cut next, I don't even know, because they don't have a running back who's like kind of on the bubble at this point. All 3 of their guys, if they cut them, they either lose them or they end up eating money. In the case of Edwards, I'm sure they would lose, but they would eat money, and with Hill the same thing, because he's signed through next year. Obviously, they're not going to cut Keaton Mitchell at this point. He'd be scarfed up at a second by 24 other NFL teams probably. So anyway, I have a hard time seeing exactly who it would be. I guess Daryl Worley maybe is a guy you can handshake deal back onto the team. And you're really playing with fire to be down to 2 safeties and have one of your third guy as an activation. But, given the long history they have of expensive dinners to get Worley to accept the next transaction he's going through, I don't actually know what the process is, obviously, but they have a very close relationship with Daryl Worley in terms of getting him okay with transactions. I guess it could be him. I wouldn't be really thrilled about that. I guess if you signed Ndamukong Suh and you really wanted to shift some snap burden, Brent Urban might be a guy who would go to the practice squad.
Yeah. The other name that I'm wondering, and it depends on how high they are on him, but in terms of his contribution this year, it's Jalen Armour-Davis, who has essentially not done anything for them, and doesn't seem to be needed on the depth chart, but is a player you would like to have in the future. Potentially, but if you're thinking this year alone, then he might be the player that I'd be thinking about.
Right. I don't think that's unrealistic. You could probably take a chance on Tylan Wallace on cutting him. The other guy, and this would be a risk, but I'm not sure how much of a market there is for the guy JAD as a second-year player. I think that market, the risk is actually fairly small of losing him, but there might still be someone who really scouted him heavily and wants to take a chance on a guy who's in his second year. But the other guy is Salah. I mean,
Mhm.
Saleh is clearly not ready to step on an NFL playing field. You typically want to have um, 9 guys on your among your offensive linemen who are healthy, and they have. Trying to think, yeah, they not including Saleh, they still have 8. So if they cut Saleh, they would still have 8, but it would be they'd have to wait for Moses to come back to have 9 again. So there's a little bit of risk there, but I think he'd be a guy that at this point, obviously he's a developmental lineman.
Yep.
Chances get taken with those players, and occasionally they get lost. I don't think anybody really right now would be deluded into thinking he'd be a left tackle prospect, or the Ravens probably would have already shown him there.
No, I mean, I think he's a guard only, and he's a guard who's not nearly ready to play. Mm-hmm. So to your point, and that's another team has no chances of winning, maybe a team that's 1-7, like the Carolina Panthers, or there's Arizona Cardinals who just want a warm body that has potential. That would be my concern about cutting someone like that. But it's when you're in a position where the Ravens are, when you're in potential, Super Bowl contender. I mean, we talked about that. We think they are a Super Bowl contender. The very good odds of making it to that game and winning that game. You want to put your best team out there. You might not necessarily have the luxury of having a kind of a bench warmer on your 53-man roster.
Right. There are. I mean, the Ravens so far have not lost Tayshaun Manning off their practice squad. He was a guy who looked like a prospect coming out of Kentucky, and might have been a guy who would have been on a roster now. They have some other guys there. A lot of their practice squad is already filled with guys in their 8th year. Guys like Laquan Treadwell. And I've looked at the list, but what is it's almost hilarious to look at this. It's like I don't want to compare it to that because it's not a fair comparison. It'll be derogatory to the players involved. But it's like I can think of another example of this. But it's a lot of late career players, and they have a relatively thin group of prospect type talent who is true developmental talent on that practice squad. They have a few. Manning might be the best name. Vokalek is out there. Jeremy Lustian is out there. They've got a few guys who figure into their 24 plans. But it's not a lot. It's not a whole lot of players. All right, whose turn is it? My turn to pick another player?
Yes.
All right, let's continue. I want to talk about Marlon Humphrey because he's been having kind of a struggle-ish season, but he hadn't been targeted too much. Again, this game only gets targeted 3 times, 1 catch for 5 yards, and that's just really good. He was there deep on 1 coverage. I think he was there in the end zone when Stone had the PD on the pass. There's his first non-interception PD. But anyway, that he was been with the receivers and gave up 1 5-yard throw is nothing, and generally playing good football now. And I want to see that continue because his overall stats for the year is still not that impressive. I believe his passer rating against is still over 100. That'll change, by the way, dramatically if he gets an interception. But he's allowed a fairly high percentage of completions against him for the year. I'm trying to go to that information right now. 9 of 14 for 104.5 rating. That's actually improved dramatically, but been penalized 4 times too. And he wasn't penalized in this game, which is nice. He had 4 in the previous 3 games combined.
Yeah, I do feel like one of those penalties was kind of bogus. But he hasn't had the best kind of bounce back coming back from injury. But this game, I think against good competition too. I think he really showed that he is still a top tier corner, and he's going to be a big part of what the Ravens are going to do down the stretch. They're going to need him, I think, against especially some of these teams like the Bengals, like the 49ers, Dolphins, that are very aggressive downfield, and having him able to take away a top option of the opposing offense is something that this defense doesn't have outside of him. I mean, maybe Kyle Hamilton to a certain extent, and depending on what he's covering, if it's a tight end, I think he does a really good job. But he's not really the guy who's going to be able to line up across him, Jamar Chase, and limit him. And Marlon Humphrey, when he's playing his best, can do that.
We have to depend on Burrow's arm strength and two safeties over the top, limiting what they have at receiver. T. Higgins is an enormous size mismatch for anybody, and Boyd can get down the seam effectively, but you take a lot of that away with the cover 2 scheme. And then Chase's ability to get down the field, puts Burrow in the awkward position of having to force it. And Burrow in that first game was 0 for 7 with 1 pick, throwing 15 yards or more. So I'm actually excited about their options against a team like the Bengals. Low arm strength quarterbacks, perfect for good reading safeties to figure out.
Yeah, and that would be a good litmus test, I think, as well for the defense. They've been playing well, but they haven't had quite that level of quarterback. Burrow is more of a cerebral quarterback, accuracy quarterback, touch quarterback than he is like pure arm strength. I think, and they'll have that as well when they play the Jaguars and they play the Chargers. Those are the players that can really kind of throw it pinpoint accuracy downfield target on a rope. So those are also going to be some dangerous opponents that they're going to have to plan for, because those cover 2 holes won't be as they'll be more available to those quarterbacks than they would be against like a quarterback like Burrow, who needs to put it there with perfect timing and accuracy, which he's capable of doing. But having arm strength makes that throw much easier.
Yeah.
So we'll see how well that this defense can match up against those teams.
Yeah, it's one of the nice things about the Ravens schedule the rest of the way. It's hard, but it should really prepare them for the playoffs. And I'm not saying the chance is 0, but it's a pretty damn limited probability that they're gonna miss the playoffs from where they are right now. So they need. I mean, to get in, they probably need 3 more wins at some point during the season. They have a couple not too difficult games, and including some divisional games at home, and they still have 5 of 8 games to play at home the rest of the year. So they've got a lot to look forward to, and their focus, their sights are clearly on the number 1 seed overall. That's what they want, and that's what they should want. But the amount of preparation they're going to getting ready for the playoffs from the next few weeks should make them stronger.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's part of what allows the best teams to win in the playoffs, is having that experience against the good teams. They know that they can compete with them. They've been there. They've played against the best quarterbacks. So there's nothing that they haven't faced before. I'm glad that the Ravens have a tough stretch down the schedule, because I think they're up for it, for one. But I think it's going to be good experience moving into the postseason to have those games, to play those quarterbacks, allow them who most likely will see, in the AFC, playoffs, and potentially in the Super Bowl as well. If the San Francisco team in particular is one of the matchups I'm looking forward to, because that could similar to the 2012 season be a preview of that matchup in the championship.
All right, outstanding. How about do you want to move on to the mailbag here, or do you want to do a couple more players, or what do you want to do?
Maybe one more player each, because I did want to touch on Roquan. It maybe wasn't his most stat driven game that he's had, but just his constant presence as a middle linebacker, what he does in coverage, I think is truly exceptional for the linebacker position. There's maybe 1 or 2 other linebackers in the league who not only are asked to do what he does, but are able to pull it off, play in, play out, always seemingly being in the right position, knowing he's very cerebral. Like he knows what's happening around him. And it's fun to watch him play football. And he's been such a massive contributor to this team. And I think, he just needs to be mentioned always as a foundational player for this Ravens defense. And he's really transformed what they can do down in and down out.
Yeah, PFF has a very tough standard for missed tackles. It's much tougher than Pro Football Reference, and you'll hear me say occasionally that various standards disagree on missed tackles, but they have them for only 4 missed tackles the entire season. In fact, the Ravens only missed 2 this last game. Yeah. One of them was by Oweh on the sack, on the missed sack for -6 that ended up being a 5-yard run. But the other one was, I don't even remember who had it, but 2 missed tackles for a game is a huge cleanup relative to what they've been doing.
Yeah, and they had a couple of games earlier I mean, they had some games that were poor. I think the Cardinals game, for instance, they had it was double digits, I think, that they missed. Before that, they were pretty clean, especially in the open field, in several of the games. But it's one of those things that kind of goes under the radar in terms of like a stat, but it really has a big impact in how the game flows, because oftentimes all it takes is one missed tackle, and a 3-and-out turns into a complete drive. A missed tackle can be backbreaking, even if it doesn't let up a 20-yard play. It allows drives to continue. It's frustrating for the players because they know they should have made the play, and it can kind of snowball. Seeing what they did in this past game in terms of their tackling, shows what they're capable of, for one. And I think it really set the tone for how dominating the effort was.
Yep. I don't know that I have another player that I just have to hit on. I'm always thrilled with what Michael Pierce is doing. But we talked a little bit about what he does and the pairing with Justin Madubuike. If you want me to detail on that, go out to my article and read it there about how Pierce and Madubuike are playing together on most snaps. I think we hit on Hamilton and the relationship to Stone and Mollett and Worley in particular with regard to how those players are arranged in packages. So I don't think we need to go over that again. So that's in the first episode as well. So I'll call it there. If you have another one you want to bring up, you have my last selection if you want it.
No, I think that's fine. We talked about definitely the players that I really wanted to hit on. So we can move on to the next segment.
Okay.
Here.
Why don't we talk about the MVPs first of all for this game and how you would line them up 3, 2, 1. I got my guys. Who's your number 3 guy? Or if you need another minute to think about that, we do the mailbag first.
I can start with that. I'll go with Justin Madubuike as number 3 for me. Just consistent, up the middle. Had another sack in this game. He's stout. He's always in the middle of every single pressure, and he's really had this breakout season, which. He's always had, issues with consistency. One game he'll be a superstar, and the next game he's a 0 in the stat sheet. This year he seems to be putting it all together. Part of that is because he's played more. He's been on the field more. I think that this has led to more opportunities, but he's also played better than he has in years past. So I think he deserves it in this game. He's a huge part of what they're doing up front. And, I'd like to, hopefully see him in this column every single week.
All right. I'll give you my third guy, and that's Kyle Hamilton. Great. He's well-rounded effort. Did not have any missed tackles again in this game. Did some great downhill play. Had 2 contributions to drive ending plays. I always look at that as being exceptional leverage involved with that. And, the other nice thing to see is he missed the interception, and then he's immediately doing push-ups. I mean, he's part of the accountability team on the team very clearly, and despite being one of the real star players at a young age and being a guy who, it's possible for a player like Kyle Hamilton to get a big head, but he's a very cerebral player. And, you don't have dozens of those on a typical NFL team. He's a little bit unusual in that regard, and certainly a guy that I think does exceptionally well in learning the game as he goes. And it's part of what's made him such a great versatile player. And I'm not saying it's an intelligence thing, but Brandon Stevens, he's played a ton of positions lifetime, and it's taken him a lot more time to adapt being good at his new position. For example, Michael Orr never did. When he got moved around, he was really never. He'd have to be like he's learning a new language to play left tackle, and then he goes back to right tackle, and he's not nearly as good as he was as a rookie. And so you're worried about what's going on with that. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and it's usually great players who can be moved around in position, but it's also smart players sometimes who can do this. So Hamilton's versatility on this team, I think, is in large part intelligence driven, and I'm glad to see him participating in the accountability drills that he did.
Yeah, I thought he had that interception for sure. It wasn't necessarily the easiest interception because he did kind of have to go through the receiver there, but he had a beat on it the entire way. It looked like he wanted to have that as a pick six, and then maybe just kind of took his eye off it at the last minute. But yeah, I mean, he's been fantastic all year, ever since he joined the Ravens. Really, since he's been given opportunity to basically be a starting player, he's a joy to watch. I think for me, the number two in this game, I was thinking about a couple of different players, but I'm going to go with Jadeveon Clowney. And he's been a consistent player for the Ravens, maybe their most consistent pass rusher between him and Matabike all year. And he's been able to just win in the kind of the one-on-one situations that you need a pass rusher to win at. But he also did something in this game which was very impactful as well, which is getting 2 pass deflections. And that those in a lot of ways are huge plays. Drive ending, I think one of them was. And that makes a huge difference, even though it doesn't necessarily show up in some of the stat sheets. It's a big performance, and it's good to see him finish his tour de force against previous teams that he's played for to get the win against the Seahawks. So I've been enjoying watching him. He's having a late career renaissance here with Baltimore, and I think he's been a huge contributor, and I think hopefully continues to play that way the rest of the season.
Yeah, it'd be wonderful if the Ravens could re-sign him, more or less on the cheap. There'd be incentives involved, but hopefully this, it could be a relationship and continue. So it certainly seems to like it here. Harbaugh seems to like him. That's in some ways the best thing. But I had him for 4 pressure events in this game. One of them was late, a pass defense, but he had another pass defense and 2 pressures, 2 drive ending plays that he contributed to. Clowney has had a lot of the contributory pressures that have led to other people's sacks this year. So if we have a quick pressure guy who works off the line of scrimmage, he's the primary one who's getting a lot of this. Van Noy's gotten some too, so I'm not going to put him down, but or away. They're all good, but Clowney's really been the most consistent, highest level win rate guy that the Ravens have been able to depend on. 2 other things about this game that I really like. He's very good at shutting down the run, particularly if the run's going to the other side. Does a really good job of closing ground, not losing contain on the play, but also tracking down the ball carrier. Safeties are kind of known for creeping up to the line of scrimmage and doing that because they know they're not going to get blocked. In Clowney's case, just was really good at that. Had a couple plays that I've got mentioned in my article about him that are in his star quality section of notes for the game. But he's been terrific, and boy, are the Ravens lucky to have him.
Yeah, and one last thing about Clowney.
Also my number 2 guy, by the way.
Oh, nice. Sorry, to steal your guy.
That's right.
One last thing about Clowney. I think one of the things that he's maybe had an issue with is the missed tackles, and a lot of those have been missed sacks. But some of them have been missed tackle for losses too. I think Pro Football Focus has him for 6 missed tackles, and I would be surprised if any of them were not in the backfield. I think he's been so disruptive. He's been able to get penetration. He's been able to, if not make the play, the tackle, the sack, it's led to another player getting that cleanup tackle or cleanup sack. So he's been a very impactful player for them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Pro Football Focus also has the stop number, which is really like defensive wins. So I believe it uses the Football Outsiders old definition of how far you have to get to stay on schedule in terms of down and distance. He's had 17 tackles contributions as they count them, and they usually are pretty rigid about giving assist tackles out and whatnot. So he might have a higher tackle total somewhere else from official sources, but he's got 12 stops among those 17, which is really nice. That's a high rate even for an outside linebacker or a defensive lineman to get that high a percentage of your stops be a win where the offense is not staying on schedule.
Yeah. So does it go to you then for your number 1?
No, you're the guest. You tell me who your number 1, because I'm sure we got the same guy.
I was gonna say, I think I'm gonna steal your guy again.
Go ahead and do it.
What is going to be Kyle Van Noy for his performance in this game? Back-to-back sacks, really nice plays. The sack fumble, strip sack, I should say. We talked about him more in the first half, but what he's been able to do to come in off the street, immediately come in and be a contributor from day one, essentially, has been a big part of why the Ravens defense is as good as it is. They needed that third, outside linebacker to be in that rotation, to be able to get consistent pressure up front. He's a cerebral player. He's able to rush the passer classically. He's able to move and be a blitzer as well, and coming from different angles and different alignments. And he's just a great kind of yin yang to what they have with Oweh and Clowney. And he's just been a phenomenal addition, and it's so fun to watch him have this ability to contribute and in an unexpected way. Because I was not expecting this level of contribution for him. So he's been fun to watch.
I mean, me either. This level of contribution, this style of contribution, all being pass rush based and basically none being dropped into coverage, where I thought the Ravens really needed somebody. But it kind of shows up in the notes when I look at this, and it's just the down and distance. So the first one is on 2nd and 11, on 3rd and 11. Despite ATS, he had a late PD, or sorry, he had a late QH, I should say. Then on 2nd and 10, on 3rd and 21, on 3rd and 15, you see what's going on here. He's getting a lot of the good pass rush opportunities when there's a lot of, there's 2nd or 3rd down and there's long yardage to go. He delivered on those though. And one of his pass rush contributions kind of went unnoticed. He had 2 sacks. I don't think anybody missed those. He had 2 other pressures. He had a quarterback hit that was late. So it doesn't count as a pressure for me, but it's a late quarterback hit. That's definitely impactful when you knock down the other guy's quarterback, if you can do it without getting penalized anytime at all. But there's another one that honestly got missed, I think. It was on the 3rd and 11 early on. He didn't allow himself. He forced Peters to necktie him for a holding call on Matabike's sack. Now, that's a great thing about holding calls is they give you the option to say, you know what, we'll take that sack instead, which means they're very costly for the offense. But that would have been a great way for the Ravens to negate any kind of a positive outcome there that might have been a first down and create a 3rd and 21 instead. It was a big contribution in this game, and it wasn't an option taken. Well, in some sense, the option was taken. They declined the penalty, but it's a valuable play to generate that potentially negative situation for the offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe he also drew a holding penalty in the previous game against Arizona. I think it might have been on a run play or as a play where the quarterback was escaping the pocket.
Yes, hands up. I remember him doing that on the right edge. Yeah,
it's the veteran savvy that he brings to the team.
Yeah. Other than Beckham is the ultimate anti-hero of penalty drawing, which it's real value he's providing. I don't mean to do it. It's just one of these things that, stepping in particular in the Tennessee game, stepping on Jeffrey Simmons' hands and then just being ready to be pushed down as soon as he got up because he knew it was coming. Oh no, it's a good thing they play football in that field, a sport that has a lot of flopping, and obviously the fields are built to take that. But actually, don't need to get into that. Great going through this with you. How about we talk about a few questions from the mailbag since we got our MVPs done, and I'm going to go over there and ask you to do the same, and we'll kind of walk through some of these questions because we had some great ones this week.
Yeah, there was one that I wanted to bring up. I'm trying to find who the listener was, a reader who asked it, but it was about Brandon Stevens.
Okay.
And I'm trying to find who actually it was, and I'll try and find it. But basically, the question was, what are the chances of Brandon Stevens being brought back, or not being brought back, but being brought extended midseason? And I think that there's actually a pretty good chance that could happen. They've done it in the past with players who are kind of in this mold of like having being kind of elevated to a different level in season. I think Chuck Clark is a perfect example of a player who still had some time on his contract. He's been playing really well in his first kind of major time starting. I think at that point, I forget he was even filling in at that point. But I think Stevens is clearly a player that the Ravens had eyes on. That they knew had this potential. For various reasons, wasn't able to kind of fill that potential, and we can talk about that too. But I would say there's probably like a 20% 20-30% chance that they might get an extension done by the end of the season. And I think if not by the end of the season, in the off season, I think there's a very good chance that he'll be extended prior to playing out his fourth season, because there is no other long-term option that they have opposite of Marlon Humphrey, and I think he fits that mold. I don't think he'll be overly expensive, and I think he's a player that the Ravens really like, and he's played very well this season.
Yeah, and it does make sense in terms of he's a player where there'll be divisible benefit on the table. So he will probably be sober enough, and his dad was an NFL player, so he'll probably be sober enough to understand that you probably want to take some risk off the table to take some guaranteed money here. And he's got a chance to do that. So they might extend him for 3 years before his fourth season, which really means he'll be a Raven for 24 through 27 would be the likely thing. $6 million per year, maybe it needs to be more, but it'd be some amount that would be not a back-breaking number to the Ravens. They'd be getting him a slight discount, and he'd be signing early and guaranteeing his bankroll, which I think makes a lot of sense, by the way, for a young player.
Yeah, and just to get back to who I think that was Jeff B on Twitter who asked about the extension. Oh, no. It was Zach Weinberg who asked about the extension, and Jeff asked about the play of Brandon Stephens. And maybe we take a second to talk about Brandon Stephens as well as a player. And I think that, part of the reason is he was kind of shuffled around. We talked about, different players being shuffled from position to position. He played mostly safety. In his first year with the Ravens, he played some outside corner, but that he didn't really play mostly corner until last year, but it was kind of like moving in and out of starting of the lineup. I think this leading into this season, this off season, they decided you're just playing cornerback. We drafted you potentially to play as safety, but things change. You're going to be a cornerback now. That's what he played in college that last year, even though he played running back before that. So he's kind of moved around a lot.
Yeah, he really played when he was at SMU. This was one of the hard things about scouting him and going back and watching the film, is that they moved him around on a down by down basis between all three of slot corner, outside corner, and safety. Yeah.
So he's moved one position, another position, another position, another position, basically throughout his entire career playing football for the past 4 years. This year he's just been your cornerback. This is your position. I think the scheme has helped him. I think he's better suited in this type of scheme where he may not have to be kind of playing tight man coverage, 50% of the time, allowing him to, keep his eyes in front of him. He has the athleticism to run with receivers, but he can be pretty sticky in coverage too. I think he can sometimes get lost in terms of finding the ball. That's probably his biggest weakness right now. Mm-hmm. But overall, he's really impressed me this year. He's someone that, like I said, I think the Ravens would like to definitely keep around. I think now is the time to kind of get a deal in place for that.
Yeah, the Ravens are set up with safeties that might make Stephens' job, one that's easier here. So this probably ought to be a conditions under which he'd really like to play. That's not enough. Usually the money rules. What I'll say is in terms of Stephens, he hasn't had a penalty in the last 5 games. So that's been a terrific run he's been doing. He hasn't allowed a touchdown all season. He's had 2 interceptions, and his passer rating against for the entire season, and this is PFF calling out the targets for us, which is usually correct, is 68.1. I think we take that, from a corner. Yeah. He hasn't had a single game where he's been chucked at for 100 NFL rating. That's very hard to do, by the way. Very hard to do, because all it takes is, somebody to catch 2 out of 2 balls against you for 40 yards, and you're going to give up 100 rating. Even with no interception, even if there's no touchdown involved. So you really don't. I mean, it's very hard to avoid that. And he's been thrown at a ton, which I think has helped because he actually has a lot of chances per game, so he doesn't run into these situations where people complete 2 out of 2 passes against, as has been the case for instance against Marlon Humphrey. But love the penalty reduction, love the way he's playing, love the trend of his season this year. Not only within his career, but also this year, how he's progressing during the season. He's down to, 6.5 yards per target. So far now for the year, he was over 7 earlier, but he's playing some great freaking football, and I'd be all for a re-signing. let me bring up one more question. We're gonna try and get to a couple more of these here. We had an absolute great question that I couldn't get to in 280 characters here. It's from Chris Raganisi, and he says, thoughts on the safety rotation when with Williams back. Big Nickel feels like the answer, but don't love Williams or Gino in a SS role. By the way, great point there. Good problem to have, and I know Mike will figure it out. Not an easy solution, though, in my opinion. And I said, great question. I'll address on the pod. We talked about this a little earlier, and maybe the hardest thing to figure out about this is whether or not Gino, would fit in a strong safety role as the Ravens utilize that strong safety this year. My own personal opinion, I think he can do it.
I agree. I think he can do it. I think he's done it in the past. He's filled in all around safety. So he has that experience. The missed tackles has been kind of the one, sticky thing with Stone at times throughout his career. He has at times not been the best there, but I've seen a lot of good play from him as well. Coming up from the safety position and run support, he's done well in plays where there's like a quick screen pass. I feel like he's made some nice plays in those type of situations, diagnosing and being able to make a play in open space. So I feel comfortable with him in the strong safety position, and I think that like we talked about, you're getting your best your best 5 defensive backs on the field, and if that includes 3 safeties, I think you find ways to make it work. And I think there's some real interchangeability there too. I don't think it has to be clearly defined. If Marcus Williams is always going to be the free safety and Gino always going to be the strong safety, it may somewhat be dictated by Marcus Williams' health and what he's capable of doing in terms of how often do you want him in there making tackles? Because even though he's absent due to the hamstring injury, I did notice on the field at times him kind of flexing the arm, flexing the shoulder, not looking completely comfortable out there with the injury that he had, the pectoral muscle. So hopefully, this time off has allowed him to heal some in his upper body as well. And maybe he's potentially more of a, or I should say less of a liability in terms of the run defense. But I think out of those two, Geno Stone is definitely the better option to have in the box than Williams on a majority of plays.
I mean, I go as far as this. First of all, if they're just talking about the amount of split safety usage the Ravens use within this defense, yes, there's times where he's going to roll down and make a play. There's times he's going to have to roll down and cover the slot when Hamilton blitzes, for example. There's certainly things like that you expect out of Geno Stone. I don't think there's anything in that set that is beyond what he would do. I mean, in terms of being a special teams player, that's one of the core functions he has, is being a good tackler. So while it's something that hasn't worked out all the time on defense, I think it's something he can improve at. I even think that he'd be a fine dime. I think, it maybe he's not exactly ready for that this year, and maybe there's a different set of short area skills he needs to pick up, but he had a great underneath interception in the previous game. I guess it's getting hard to tell the Geno Stone games that have one interception apart because there have been so many consecutive of them. But the interception he had, I think it was against the Lions, was an undercut interception. We actually covered a short crossing route instead of being in his usual deep position. Did it well. It's the one he took away from Brandon Stevens. Right, jumped in front of him. Yep. I think he's perfectly adaptable. I wouldn't want him as a slot corner. I think that'd be an underutilization of what he did. But if he comes up and plays dime in the box, I trust him to rush the passer. I trust him to make the tackles you need, made sure of the sticks. And, I would trust him to be a much better coverage player than the second best linebacker you could put out there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely always the case. Mm-hmm. And, maybe we'll even see some, maybe not. I was gonna say maybe we'll see some dime. I don't know if that'll happen or not. But it could happen depending on how the Ravens are doing and if they want to, take some of their star linebackers off the field. Did you want to hit on any more?
I got to hit on a couple more here because people put in these questions. I really want to make sure they can do with this. I do not want to do the Stephen A. Smith rant. Sorry about that, Frank. I don't know enough about Stephen A. Smith to really make that sort of a rant. And anything I do, I'm sure people take the wrong way. Okay, here's a good one from Cole Philippou. He says, for the sake of playing devil's advocate, what's the biggest hole in the Ravens team, assuming health holds up? Great question.
Yeah. So assuming health holds up is really kind of the key factor there, because if there's any hole, I do think it might be some of the injury issues we've had, especially at left tackle. We've seen Ronnie Stanley in and out of the lineup a little bit. I don't think he's 100% right now. He doesn't look like he's the same player that he was a couple of years ago. So for me, it might be the O-line in terms of just their week in, week out pass protection. I think they might be a liability. We've seen that in past weeks. Cleveland abused them quite a bit last time they played. They were less healthy then. But I think, that it would be probably my biggest concern about the team as a whole would be the health and performance of the O-line.
Okay. Just to pick something different, I have not been particularly juiced with the explosiveness of the wide receiver position after Flowers. And that's been part of my issue, has been that Flowers is not being used for the number of, for the depth of routes that I would like. I'd like him to have a much higher ADOT. I'd like him to be drawing safety attention, et cetera. The other thing I'd like them to do is probably give some of Beckham's snaps to Bateman. Bateman has looked a lot better the last couple of games. It's unfortunate to say, and people love Beckham, and they still expect 2015 Beckham to show up again. He's never coming back. Beckham is who he is right now. There's a whole bunch of savvy things he brings to the field in terms of drawing some penalties, which have real value. There's a whole bunch of other things that he does in terms of the 6.5 yards per target that Ravens fans are just going to have to live with. That's who he is. And the more they force feed him the ball, the more that yards per target number is going to come down. It's not going to go up. And we saw when they tried to feed him the touchdown in the end zone there, they took a throw they should never have been throwing at Beckham. I mean, Woolen had him completely covered, and it was a pressured throw and whatnot. And fortunately, Huntley overthrew the whole mess. And then he threw Huntley threw one of the best balls he's probably thrown as a Raven to get it right in there in the corner to Beckham for the touchdown. But Beckham is no doubt wants the football, will talk loudly about wanting the football, will practice hard and talk about how much more he wants the football. And hey, as a wide receiver, so I understand that. But Bateman is the guy who can really do something with the football. And I want them to get him involved more in the offense. We've seen the last couple of weeks just a big rise in what Bateman's done, some good trust balls he's made. And I think that would be the weakness I'd point to is they've just got to involve Bateman more in that offense.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it is promising to see that he's gotten more targets. I think Lamar is starting to build that trust with him again. Really, this past week, some exceptional catches by Bateman, and including the one throw where Lamar kind of threw like a sidearm, like almost like curveball, like 20 yards downfield, and Bateman made a kind of a ridiculous catch on it, and it was in between three defenders. Like, that was not an easy throw to make. It was right on the money. And Bateman, he kind of made it happen. It was a kind of a fingertip catch that he was able to haul in. Really impressive from both of those. And I think hopefully that's something that can be built on, because I agree with you. I think, the wide receivers need to be more integrated into the offense. And, that includes Beckham, that includes Aguilar, but the Flowers and Bateman, those are your two best receivers. And they should be, I think, the ones that are getting the most targets in the passing game, aside from Mark Andrews.
Right. All right. Outstanding. I got one more question I want to hit on, then we'll call it a night here. Is from Brett Hammonds, Ravens dad, 1985, who says, do you think Geno Stone is having the best contract year in Ravens history in terms of the contract he will get compared to the preseason expectations? I don't know if I could put it in terms of exactly that, because, Pernell McPhee and other players have been great, but maybe in terms of above preseason expectations, that might be true. Paul Kruger is known for having a great year, but the Ravens had a number of guys who've been fantastic in their year they've left the Ravens. Ryan Jensen would be another guy who just took a huge leap forward in his year and all of a sudden became a $42 million man with the Bucs. But what Brett says is he was looking at barely over the vet minimum for next year, and now he might earn 10 to 15 million a year. So I guess that's maybe how he's defining it is, some player that we could have had cheap, we didn't get it done, and now we might earn 10 to 15 million a year next year. Probably yes, then I'm going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think all those names kind of are in that range in terms, especially if we're talking about 10 years ago. The contract Paul Kruger got was kind of a top of the market contract for an outside linebacker at the time. That was someone who was pretty. I don't want to say like average. He was probably a slightly above average player before that final season, but he really broke out in that Ravens Super Bowl run in particular. He was their primary edge rusher in that game, or not that game, but in that stretch. And he made a lot of money for himself with that Super Bowl run. He might be the number one in that sense. Who knows? Geno Stone, he could definitely surpass that. I just don't think that safeties get paid that much in today's NFL. So I don't see him kind of, even if he does make a contract that's larger than what Kruger got because of, the way the salary cap is moved. I think in terms of the percentage of the salary cap, probably smaller contract. Right.
I would basically agree with that. I think he's probably looking at 4% of cap somewhere, which would be about 10 million. He might get a 4-year deal at that. I mean, the Ravens, they just paid Marcus Williams, who has a much bigger pedigree, 5 years for 70 million. I don't think he's going to quite make that kind of top of the market money, even with a really exceptional interception total. I mean, he could, I guess, if he gets defensive player of the year, but I think he's more likely to fit in that probably in about a $10 million range. And, all we can do right now is honestly be happy for the guy. And honestly, be happy for the Ravens that despite the fact that they fumbled him away by cutting him and the Texans took him away, the Texans fumbled the ball right back to us and then let him get re-signed.
Yeah. And there was one other mailbag question that asked, is there any chance that Geno Stone could be extended? I don't see that, frankly, as being possible because I think there's more money to be made, on the open market for him. Unfortunately, it just he wouldn't have. I mean, the Ravens might be able to say we'll have you as our third safety who are going to start in like a nickel role, and you're basically going to be out there 80% of the snaps. That's attractive to a certain extent, but are they really going to be able to pay him $10 million a year? I don't know. Do they want to do that without being able to move on from Marcus Williams for at least another year? Mm-hmm. Potentially. I mean, there's some like not 0% chance that happens, but I think it's pretty unlikely, especially considering what other teams are likely able to offer will be more.
Yeah, I'm in unfortunately the same place as you, which means you've already paid 2 safeties. You kind of have made your bed. Now you need to sleep in it. In terms of the risk of losing another good one. There's a lot of teams out there that don't have a free safety at all. And all those teams are talking about their versatile safeties because, we can play anywhere. Well, that usually means you don't have a free safety. Geno Stone is going to bring that to some NFL team that's desperate to get it, and he's going to really get paid for it. And just wish him the best at this point.
Yep.
All right. Outstanding. Always great having a conversation about football with you, Gabe. And we all of a sudden, 2.5 hours are gone. We've had a lot of fun talking, but we got to call it here. Want people to know about what you're working on and where they can talk football with you online.
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter at Gabe Fergie. Love to talk about the Ravens, anything Ravens related, contracts, players, trades, performances, future draft, all of it. I have a podcast that's with Jordan Coe, my co-host. We have an episode that should be coming out tomorrow, talking about, what the Ravens are currently situated with their win over the Seahawks and some of what we take away from that game. We should have another one coming out later this week, a little bit more in-depth kind of look at what's happened in the past couple of games and what we're thinking about moving forward as well over the second half of the season. So I encourage you all to give it a listen and see if you like it. Talk to me on Twitter. I like to, talk with anybody. So that's my spiel. So hopefully you give it a download and like what you hear.
Make sure you guys, you give that show a chance. Jordan and Gabe, both very valued and regular guests on this show. And I always love talking with each of them. Other folks out there, if you want to do a film study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I'm sure you know by now, but keep your idea kind of small so we can fit it in a shorter episode and deliver some pithy content for people that is juxtaposed to this long hour and change content we get with Gabe and other guests on the show. But really appreciate all you and all the ideas that have come in for shows. Please keep them coming. Gabe, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Ken. Always a pleasure. And, hopefully I can come and join you again sometime soon.
All right. We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.